In the summer of 1942, trains arrived at a place that did not appear on most maps. There were no prison walls, no watchtowers visible from the road, no signs indicating what this place truly was. People were told they were being resettled. They were allowed to bring luggage. They were promised work. Within hours, entire communities disappeared. No registration, no prisoner numbers, no records, only trains arriving and never returning. This place was called Treblinka, and in just over 1 year, it became one of the deadliest locations in human history. Treblinka was a Nazi camp complex located on the territory of occupied Poland, approximately 80 kilometers northeast of Warsaw, near the village of Treblinka in the Soko-Podlaski district. The camp operated from the year 1942 until the year 1943 and was one of the main facilities of Operation Reinhard, the program of Nazi Germany aimed at the physical extermination of the Jewish population of the general government. Under the name Treblinka, 2 separate camps existed, each serving a different function. Treblinka 1 was established in the year 1941 as a forced labor camp for Polish civilians accused of violating the occupation regime. Prisoners were used for compulsory labor, including gravel extraction, road construction, and forestry work. Conditions of detention were extremely harsh, characterized by physical abuse, executions, starvation, and a high mortality rate. However, the camp was not intended for immediate mass killing. Treblinka 2 was constructed in the spring of the year 1942 exclusively for the purpose of mass extermination. It had no function related to detention or long-term imprisonment. Every structural element of the camp was designed according to a single objective: to ensure the rapid killing of deported individuals. The camp was not part of the concentration camp inspection system and did not fall under the standard SS camp administration. It was subordinated directly to the leadership of Operation Reinhard. The decision to construct Treblinka 2 was made following the beginning of large-scale deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto. The SS leadership faced the logistical challenge of eliminating hundreds of thousands of people within a short period of time. Treblinka was selected due to its proximity to a railway line, its remote rural location, and the ability to conceal camp operations from the civilian population. Construction of the camp began in May of the year 1942. The work was carried out by Jewish laborers brought from nearby areas. After completion of construction, these workers were murdered in order to eliminate witnesses. The camp occupied an area of approximately 400 by 400 meters. It was surrounded by a double barbed wire fence camouflaged with tree branches. Guard towers were positioned along the perimeter to maintain constant surveillance. The internal structure of the camp was divided into several functional zones. The first zone included the railway platform, the arrival area for deportation transports, administrative buildings, and storage facilities. This zone served as the initial processing point for arriving prisoners. The second zone was designated for undressing and property confiscation. Barracks were used where deported individuals were ordered to remove their clothing and leave all personal belongings. This area was intentionally designed to create the illusion of sanitary procedures. Directional signs indicated supposed access to shower facilities. The third zone was completely isolated from the rest of the camp. Access was restricted exclusively to SS personnel and selected prisoner work units. This zone contained the gas chambers and areas designated for body disposal. It was concealed from view by high fences, camouflage screens, and dense vegetation. A narrow, curved passage connected the second and third zones. It was covered with branches and wooden panels to prevent visual contact with the final destination. Deportees were directed through this corridor in organized groups without the ability to deviate from the route. The first gas chambers were constructed in the summer of the year 1942. Initially, they consisted of small sealed rooms equipped with airtight doors. Shortly after operations began, both the number and size of the chambers were expanded to increase the camp's killing capacity. By the end of the year 1942, several permanent gas chambers were in operation as a unified complex. These chambers had concrete foundations, reinforced walls, and heavy metal doors secured from the outside. The internal space was designed to accommodate large groups simultaneously. The method of killing used in Treblinka was carbon monoxide produced by an internal combustion engine. The engine was installed in a separate room, and exhaust gases were delivered into the chambers through a system of pipes. This method had previously been used in the so-called T4 euthanasia program and was later transferred to the extermination camps of Operation Reinhard. Unlike Auschwitz, Treblinka did not use Zyklon B. The absence of chemical agents allowed the camp to operate independently of supply chains, making it fully autonomous in its killing process. After completion of each killing cycle, bodies were removed from the chambers by prisoner work units. Initially, corpses were buried in large mass graves dug within the third zone of the camp. By the end of the year 1942, SS leadership issued orders to eliminate all evidence of mass burials. As a result, bodies were exhumed and burned. For this purpose, special structures constructed from railway rails and metal grates were erected on campgrounds. The process of exhumation and cremation was carried out under SS supervision and performed by prisoner labor units. These actions were part of a broader effort to conceal the crimes and were implemented in all Operation Reinhard camps. The gas chambers in Treblinka operated almost continuously. During peak periods, the camp functioned for many hours without interruption. While one group was inside the chambers, another was already being prepared in the undressing zone. This system minimized downtime and maximized killing efficiency. According to post-war investigations and historical estimates, Treblinka was capable of killing up to 10 to 12,000 people per day during periods of maximum operation. Exact numbers cannot be determined due to the deliberate absence of documentation, but the scale is confirmed by survivor testimony and logistical calculations. No official registration of victims was conducted. No names were recorded. No personal files were created. This absence of records distinguished Treblinka from mixed-function camps, such as Auschwitz or Majdanek, and served to conceal the true magnitude of the crimes. All operational processes within the camp were treated administratively as technical or economic activities. Internal SS documents employed neutral terminology that deliberately avoided references to killing or death. By the middle of the year 1943, Treblinka functioned as a fully operational extermination facility under strict administrative control. It was this systematic organization that enabled the camp to operate in complete secrecy for more than a year. By the time Treblinka II became operational, the Nazi administration already possessed extensive experience in the deportation of civilian populations from territories under German control. The primary source of prisoners for the camp was the Warsaw Ghetto, the largest Jewish ghetto in Europe, where more than 400,000 people were confined by the year 1942. The deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto began on the 22nd of July in the year 1942. German authorities officially announced that the population was being resettled to the east for labor purposes. The deported were informed that they would be transferred to work camps, where they would receive food, housing, and employment. To reinforce this deception, individuals were permitted to bring personal belongings, documents, money, and valuables. This policy was intended to reduce resistance and maintain order during deportations. The deportation process was centrally organized. People were assembled at the Umschlagplatz, a railway loading area in Warsaw. From this location, 1 to 3 transport trains departed daily. Each train typically carried between 5,000 and 7,000 people. The trains consisted of sealed freight wagons designed for cargo rather than human transport. The wagons contained no seating, no ventilation, and no sanitary facilities. Deportees were forced inside in extreme overcrowding. The journey from Warsaw to Treblinka usually lasted between 2 and 4 hours. However, Due to railway congestion and unscheduled stops, transportation often took considerably longer. During transit, prisoners had no access to water or medical assistance. Many arrived in a severely weakened physical condition. The railway line leading to Treblinka was constructed specifically for the camp. It extended directly into the camp grounds and terminated at a platform designed to resemble an ordinary rural train station. This visual deception formed an integral part of the extermination process. Upon arrival, the doors of the wagons were opened by guards. Prisoners were forced out onto the platform and ordered to form lines. Immediate separation by gender took place. Men were divided from women and children under the pretext of registration and medical inspection. Families were not permitted to remain together. This separation was carried out rapidly and without explanation. Any attempts to resist or question orders were suppressed immediately. At this stage, deception remained central to camp operations. Prisoners were informed that they would undergo disinfection before further transport. References were made to showers and hygiene procedures. These instructions were intended to prevent panic and ensure compliance. Deportees were then directed to the undressing area. They were ordered to remove all clothing and place their belongings in designated locations. Shoes were often required to be arranged neatly in pairs. Documents, money, and valuables were collected separately. All confiscated property was systematically sorted and transferred to storage facilities. These items were later transported to SS economic departments. The confiscation of property formed a significant financial component of Operation Reinhardt. Jewish prisoner work units were used to supervise these procedures. These units operated under constant guard and were forbidden from communicating any information about the true purpose of the camp. Special attention was given to maintaining order and speed. The entire arrival process was structured to minimize delays and ensure continuous movement of deportees through the camp. Children were not registered as separate individuals. No age-based classification was conducted. Infants, young children, and adolescents were processed together with adults. In cases where children arrived without parents, they were included in the general groups without documentation. Following undressing, deportees were directed along a narrow fence corridor leading from the processing zone to the extermination area. The corridor was deliberately curved and camouflaged with branches, preventing visual contact with the final destination. This passage was used to maintain a steady flow of people toward the killing facilities without interruption. During periods of peak operation, several transport trains arrived daily. In the summer of the year 1942, Treblinka processed up to 20,000 people per day. Deportations to Treblinka were not limited to Warsaw. Transports arrived from Radom, Lublin, Białystok, Stokowa, Kielce, Siedlce, Uk, Mała, Grodno, and dozens of smaller towns throughout occupied Poland. In addition, transports arrived from outside Poland, including Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, France, Greece, and the territory of present-day North Macedonia. These deportations are confirmed through railway documentation and post-war testimony. In August of the year 1942, a transport consisting largely of children from the Białystok ghetto arrived at Treblinka following the suppression of the ghetto uprising. This transport is documented in survivor accounts and post-war investigations. No prisoners arriving at Treblinka received identification numbers. No registration cards were issued. No camp records were created. This absence of documentation distinguished Treblinka from camps such as Auschwitz and Majdanek. On average, the time from arrival to death ranged from 1 to 3 hours. After each transport was processed, the camp was immediately prepared for the arrival of the next train. All visible traces of previous transports were removed before the next arrival. The deportation system of Treblinka functioned as a centralized logistical mechanism combining railway coordination, administrative deception, and strict internal organization. This structure enabled the rapid destruction of entire communities within a very short period of time. By the end of the year 1942, Treblinka had become the primary extermination center of Operation Reinhard and surpassed all other camps of the program in the number of victims. Treblinka too was placed under the direct authority of the SS and functioned as part of Operation Reinhard. The camp was not subordinated to the Inspectorate of Concentration Camps and did not belong to the standard concentration camp system. This status made Treblinka a fully secret installation operating outside regular administrative oversight. Overall command of Operation Reinhard was exercised by Odilo Globoknik, the higher SS and police leader for the Lublin district. He was responsible for planning, construction, financing, and operational supervision of the extermination camps. Globoknik reported directly to Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler and submitted regular progress reports on the implementation of the operation. The first commandant of Treblinka was Irmfried Eberl, who assumed his position in July of the year 1942. Eberl was a physician by training and had previously participated in the so-called T4 euthanasia program, which involved the systematic killing of people with physical and mental disabilities within Germany and Austria. His experience in that program served as the basis for his appointment. During Eberl's period of command, the camp operated inefficiently. The volume of incoming transports exceeded the camp's processing capacity, leading to logistical breakdowns and severe sanitary problems. As a result, Eberl was removed from his position in August of the year 1942 and transferred to Berlin. After the war, he was arrested but committed suicide before standing trial. Following his removal, Franz Stangl was appointed commandant of Treblinka. Stangl was an Austrian national and a former police officer who had previously served in a leadership position at the Sobibor extermination camp. His appointment marked a decisive turning point in the camp's development. Under Stangl's leadership, Treblinka was reorganized into a rigid administrative system. Camp operations were divided into clearly defined functional sectors. Each sector was assigned a responsible SS officer. Time schedules, procedural norms, and quantitative targets were introduced. As a result, the extermination process became highly systematized. The deputy commandant was Kurt Franz, also an Austrian SS officer. He was responsible for internal discipline, supervision of prisoner labor units, and enforcement of camp regulations. Franz later became the final commandant of Treblinka and remained in charge until the camp's liquidation. The permanent SS staff of Treblinka consisted of approximately 30 to 40 German and Austrian personnel. These individuals occupied command, supervisory, and administrative positions. They issued orders, managed daily operations, and exercised full authority over the camp. A second category of personnel consisted of auxiliary guards recruited from former Soviet prisoners of war. These men underwent training at the Treblinka training camp near Lublin and were therefore commonly referred to as Treblinka men. After training, they were deployed to the extermination camps of Operation Reinhard. Although the Treblinka guards were not formal members of the SS, they operated under SS command. They were responsible for perimeter security, escorting transports, guarding internal zones, and enforcing discipline among prisoner work units. Within the camp, selected deportees were organized into prisoner labor detachments known as Sonderkommandos. Their tasks included sorting confiscated property, maintaining camp infrastructure, removing bodies, and performing technical duties necessary for continuous operations. Members of these labor units were not expected to survive long-term. Their average lifespan ranged from several days to several weeks. Once considered physically exhausted or unnecessary, they were killed and replaced with newly arrived prisoners. The camp maintained a strict hierarchical command structure. Orders were transmitted from SS leadership downward without discussion. Independent actions were prohibited and punished immediately. The financial and material assets confiscated from victims formed a central component of Operation Reinhard's economic system. Money, jewelry, precious metals, clothing, and personal property were collected, cataloged, and transferred to SS economic offices. Detailed reports were submitted to higher authorities. To conceal the true function of the camp, falsified documentation was used. In official correspondence, Treblinka was often described as a transit or labor facility. The actual purpose of the camp was known only to a limited circle of SS officials. Communication with the outside world was strictly forbidden. Prisoners were not permitted to send letters. Civilian access was prohibited. Any unauthorized disclosure of information was treated as a violation of state secrecy. Through this administrative structure, Treblinka functioned as a self-contained extermination facility operating under direct SS authority. The combination of secrecy, rigid hierarchy, and absence of external oversight enabled the camp to carry out mass murder on an unprecedented scale. Treblinka, too, was constructed as a specialized facility for mass extermination. Unlike concentration camps intended for prolonged detention, its infrastructure was designed exclusively for the short-term processing of deported populations. Every structural element of the camp served a specific operational function within a single, centralized killing system. The camp territory was divided into 3 main zones, each completely isolated from the others. This division was intended to conceal the true purpose of the camp and to prevent incoming deportees from understanding what awaited them. The first zone functioned as the administrative and reception area. It included the railway platform, guard facilities, storage buildings, and the initial processing sector for arriving transports. This was where deportees were unloaded from trains and subjected to their first stage of control. The second zone was designated for undressing and confiscation of property. Barracks were used where deported individuals were ordered to remove all clothing and surrender personal belongings. The layout of this area was deliberately designed to simulate a sanitary procedure. Signs indicating directions to showers were placed to reinforce deception. The third zone was entirely restricted. Access was limited exclusively to SS personnel and selected prisoner labor units. This zone contained the gas chambers and the sites used for the disposal of bodies. It was concealed from external view by high fences, camouflage screens, and dense vegetation. Connection between the second and third zones was provided by a narrow, enclosed passage. The corridor was curved and covered with branches and wooden panels so that deportees could not see what lay ahead. Groups were directed through this passage under guard without the possibility of deviation. The first gas chambers were constructed during the summer of the year 1942. Initially, they consisted of small sealed rooms equipped with airtight doors. Shortly after the beginning of operations, the number of chambers and their internal capacity were expanded in order to increase the camp's killing efficiency. By the end of the year 1942, Treblinka operated a permanent gas chamber complex. These chambers were built on concrete foundations, with reinforced walls and heavy metal doors secured from the outside. The interior space was designed to hold large groups of people simultaneously. The killing method employed at Treblinka relied on carbon monoxide, generated by an internal combustion engine. The engine was installed in a separate technical room, and exhaust gases were channeled into the chambers through a system of pipes. This method had previously been used during the T4 euthanasia program and was later transferred to the extermination camps of Operation Reinhard. Unlike Auschwitz, Treblinka did not use Zyklon B. The use of engine exhaust allowed the camp to function independently of chemical deliveries and ensured continuous operation without reliance on external supply chains. After each killing cycle, bodies were removed from the chambers by prisoner labor units under SS supervision. During the early months of operation, corpses were buried in large mass graves located within the third zone of the camp. By late 1942, SS leadership ordered the destruction of all mass burial sites in order to eliminate physical evidence of the killings. As a result, bodies were exhumed and burned. For this purpose, large open-air cremation structures were constructed using railway rails and metal grates. The processes of exhumation and burning were carried out by forced labor units composed of prisoners. These operations form part of a broader program aimed at erasing traces of mass murder across all Operation Reinhard camps. The gas chambers at Treblinka operated almost continuously. During peak periods, the facility functioned for many hours without interruption. While one group was inside the chambers, another was already being prepared in the undressing area. This sequencing minimized downtime and maximized throughput. Post-war investigations and historical estimates indicate that during periods of maximum operation, Treblinka was capable of killing between 10,000 and 12,000 people per day. Exact figures cannot be established due to the deliberate absence of documentation, but the scale is supported by survivor testimony and logistical analysis. No official registration of victims was conducted. Names were not recorded. Identification numbers were not assigned. This absence of records distinguished Treblinka from camps such as Auschwitz or Majdanek and served as a deliberate method of concealing the magnitude of the crimes. Within SS administrative language, extermination processes were described using neutral technical terminology. Internal documents avoided references to killing and instead used bureaucratic expressions associated with labor, transport, or sanitation. By the middle of the year 1943, Treblinka functioned as a fully operational extermination facility under rigid administrative control and strict secrecy. It was this systematic and technical organization that enabled the camp to carry out mass murder on an unprecedented scale within a relatively short period of time. Treblinka, too, did not operate as a camp for long-term detention. It was not designed to house prisoners for extended periods and lacked infrastructure intended for sustained human habitation. Nevertheless, a limited number of prisoners were temporarily kept alive inside the camp in order to perform essential operational tasks. These individuals formed the prisoner labor units. Their total number varied, but generally ranged from several hundred to approximately 1,000 people at any given time. The composition of these units changed frequently, as most members were killed after short periods of forced labor. Prisoner labor units were assigned to tasks including sorting confiscated clothing and property, cleaning the campgrounds, maintaining facilities, transporting bodies, and performing other duties required for the continuous operation of the camp. Members of these units held no formal prisoner status. They were not registered, assigned identification numbers, or recorded in administrative documents. Their existence was considered temporary and expendable by the camp authorities. Accommodation for labor units consisted of overcrowded wooden barracks located in the first zone of the camp. Living conditions were extremely poor. Sanitary facilities were minimal or non-existent. Food rations were insufficient and intended only to maintain short-term physical functionality. Daily routines were dictated entirely by the operational needs of the camp. Work began early in the morning and often continued until late at night. Breaks were rare or non-existent. Exhaustion was widespread among labor unit members. The internal discipline system at Treblinka was not governed by written regulations. Punishments were imposed arbitrarily at the discretion of SS officers or guards. Reasons for punishment included slowing down work, physical weakness, failure to understand commands, or perceived disobedience. Punishments were often carried out publicly to intimidate others. The purpose of this system was to enforce absolute compliance and suppress any form of resistance. Children constituted a significant portion of those deported to Treblinka. The camp maintained no separate facilities, records, or classifications for minors. Children were not registered individually and were not treated as a distinct group. Infants and young children remained with their mothers until the moment of separation. When children arrived without parents, they were processed together with the general population without documentation or differentiation. Older children and adolescents were occasionally selected for labor units if they appeared physically capable of performing work. Such selections were rare, and survival time in these units was typically brief. No medical care existed within the camp. There were no physicians assigned to treat prisoners. Injuries, illness, and physical collapse were not addressed. Prisoners unable to continue working were removed from labor units and replaced. Movement within the camp was strictly controlled. Prisoners were permitted to move only under guard and only for assigned tasks. Communication between different work groups was limited and monitored. Regular roll calls were conducted among labor units. These checks served primarily to identify weakened or exhausted individuals. Prisoners deemed unfit for continued labor were removed and replaced with newly arrived deportees. One of the most important labor detachments consisted of property sorting units. These prisoners worked in storage facilities where confiscated clothing, valuables, documents, and personal belongings were systematically classified. Items were divided by category, packed, and prepared for shipment to SS economic departments. Confiscated property constituted a significant financial component of Operation Reinhard and was transported to warehouses and administrative centers under SS control. Contact between labor units and newly arrived transports was strictly regulated. Prisoners were forbidden to warn deportees or disclose the true purpose of the camp. Any attempt to do so was immediately punished. Despite the constant surveillance, informal communication developed within the labor units. Prisoners shared observations and gradually became aware of the true function of camp. This awareness spread through indirect means and personal experience rather than direct explanation. By the middle of the year 1943, a core group of prisoners had formed who fully understood that liquidation of the camp would also mean their own death. This realization became the foundation for organized resistance. It was within these labor units that the planning of an uprising began, marking the first coordinated attempt to oppose the extermination system operating within Treblinka. By the middle of the year 1943, prisoners assigned to labor units at Treblinka had reached the conclusion that the camp was approaching liquidation and that all remaining workers would eventually be killed. This assessment was based on direct observation of camp operations, the reduction of incoming transports, and the systematic elimination of labor units without replacement. The decline in deportations, particularly following the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, was accompanied by increased secrecy and stricter control measures within the camp. Prisoners recognized these developments as indications that the SS intended to eliminate all witnesses. Under these conditions, the idea of organized resistance emerged among members of the labor units. The primary objective of the uprising was not to seize control of the camp, but to enable a mass escape and preserve testimony about the crimes committed there. The organizers understood that the probability of survival was extremely low. Nevertheless, they regarded rebellion as the only remaining alternative to certain death. Planning for the uprising was conducted in strict secrecy over several months. Small groups operated independently to minimize the risk of exposure. Communication relied on trusted intermediaries and oral transmission. A central element of the plan involved acquiring weapons. Prisoners succeeded in secretly obtaining a limited number of pistols, grenades, and bladed tools. Some weapons were stolen from storage areas, while others were acquired through bribery or deception involving individual guards. At the same time, prisoners conducted covert reconnaissance of the camp. They studied guard routines, shift changes, locations of watchtowers, and access routes. This information was shared internally to coordinate timing and movement. The uprising was scheduled for early August of the year 1943. The timing was chosen based on the anticipated absence of several SS officers and a temporary reduction in security presence. The revolt began on the afternoon of the 2nd of August, 1943. The initial phase involved infiltrating the camp armory and distributing weapons to selected participants. Following this, groups of prisoners attacked administrative targets and attempted to disable communication systems. Several buildings and storage facilities were set on fire, creating confusion and disrupting command structures within the camp. Simultaneously, prisoners launched a coordinated attempt to breach the camp perimeter. Using stolen weapons and improvised tools, sections of fencing were damaged, enabling escape routes to open. Camp guards responded with gunfire. A large number of prisoners were killed during the escape attempt. Despite heavy losses, an estimated 200 to 300 individuals succeeded in breaking out of the camp and fleeing into the surrounding forest. After escaping the campgrounds, the fugitives faced extreme conditions. They lacked food, identification documents, and reliable knowledge of the terrain. German units, auxiliary police, and local collaborators initiated widespread search operations in the region. Many escapees were captured and killed in the days following the uprising. Others were betrayed or died from exhaustion and exposure. However, a number of fugitives managed to evade capture, often with assistance from local civilians or by joining partisan groups. Historical estimates indicate that between 50 and 70 former Treblinka prisoners survived until the end of the war. Their post-war testimonies became the principal source of detailed information regarding the internal functioning of the camp. The SS regarded the uprising as a serious breach of security. In response, camp authorities decided to immediately terminate all remaining operations and proceed with full liquidation of Treblinka. All remaining labor units were killed. Preparations began to dismantle the camp and eliminate all material evidence of its existence. The uprising of the 2nd of August 1943 stands as one of the largest organized acts of resistance within a Nazi extermination camp. It demonstrated that even under conditions of total control and imminent death, prisoners attempted to resist systematic annihilation. The events of that day directly accelerated the decision to destroy the camp and erase all traces of its operation. Following the prisoner uprising on the 2nd of August in the year 1943, SS authorities made the final decision to terminate all operations at Treblinka II. By that time, the primary phase of Operation Reinhard had been completed and mass deportations of Jewish populations from the general government had largely ceased. The uprising confirmed SS fears that the camp posed a serious risk of information leakage. The existence of surviving witnesses threatened the secrecy upon which the extermination system depended. As a result, the complete elimination of the camp and all remaining evidence became an immediate priority. The liquidation of Treblinka was carried out according to procedures previously implemented at other Operation Reinhard camps. The process was centrally coordinated and supervised by SS Command. The first step involved the murder of the remaining prisoner labor units. Individuals who had been kept alive for operational purposes were systematically killed in order to eliminate witnesses. Following this, dismantling of the camp infrastructure began. Gas chambers were taken apart. Wooden structures were burnt. Building materials were removed or destroyed. Metal components were dismantled and transported away for reuse or recycling. Special attention was given to burial sites. Although many mass graves had already been emptied earlier, remaining burial areas were reopened. Human remains were exhumed and subjected to further destruction. Ashes resulting from these processes were either buried in pits or scattered across the campgrounds and surrounding forested areas. These actions were intended to prevent future discovery of mass graves. The railway spur leading directly into the camp was dismantled. Rails and wooden ties were removed, and the unloading platform was destroyed. All visible indicators of camp activity were eliminated. After demolition was completed, the terrain was leveled. The soil was plowed and planted with crops. To reinforce the illusion that the site had never been used as a camp, a German farmer and his family were settled on the former camp grounds and instructed to operate an agricultural holding. This measure was intended to erase physical and psychological traces of the camp's existence and integrate the site into the surrounding rural landscape. Camp documentation was destroyed. Administrative records, orders, and internal correspondence were either burned on site or transferred to the Operation Reinhard headquarters in Lublin, where they were subsequently eliminated. The destruction of documentation significantly complicated post-war investigations. By the autumn of the year 1943, Treblinka had ceased to exist as a functioning or identifiable installation. Visually, the area was indistinguishable from ordinary farmland. From a perspective of SS leadership, the objective of erasing the camp from history had been accomplished. However, complete concealment proved impossible. Survivors of the uprising and a small number of earlier escapees succeeded in passing information beyond German-controlled territory. Their testimonies preserve knowledge of the camp's true function. After the area was liberated by the Red Army in the year 1944, Soviet authorities conducted preliminary examinations of the site. Investigators identified traces of destroyed structures, ash deposits, human remains, and fragments of personal belongings. In the years that followed, additional investigative efforts were undertaken. Although the absence of documentation and the destruction of infrastructure limited forensic analysis, the accumulated evidence confirmed the existence and purpose of the extermination camp. The liquidation of Treblinka marked the final phase of its operation, but it did not erase the historical record. Despite systematic efforts to destroy all traces, sufficient evidence survived to establish the reality of the crimes committed there. After the end of the Second World War, the former site of the Treblinka extermination camp became the subject of investigations conducted by Allied and national authorities. At the time of liberation, the camp no longer existed as an operational facility, but survivor testimonies indicated its central role in the system of mass extermination. In the year 1944, the area of the former camp was examined by Soviet investigative commissions. During inspections, investigators discovered remnants of destroyed structures, traces of foundations, large quantities of ash, fragments of human bones, and personal items belonging to victims. These findings confirmed that a large-scale extermination site had previously existed at the location. Simultaneously, efforts began to collect survivor testimony. The principal sources of information were participants in the prisoner uprising of the 2nd of August 1943 who survived until the end of the war. Their statements were recorded in Poland, Israel, the United States, and several Western European countries. These testimonies provided detailed descriptions of camp organization, personnel structure, deportation procedures, and killing methods. While individual accounts differed in certain details, their overall consistency allowed investigators to reconstruct the operational framework of Treblinka. In the immediate post-war years, investigations progressed slowly. International judicial attention was primarily focused on the Nuremberg trials, which addressed crimes committed by the highest levels of the Nazi leadership. As a result, extermination camps of Operation Reinhard initially received limited legal examination. A more extensive phase of investigation concerning Treblinka began in the Federal Republic of Germany during the late 1950s. German prosecutors gained access to archival materials and initiated proceedings against former SS personnel residing within German territory. One of the central figures in these investigations was Franz Stangl, the former commandant of Treblinka. After the war, Stangl avoided capture by using false identification documents. He escaped Europe through underground escape networks and lived for several years in Syria before relocating to Brazil. In the year 1967, Franz Stangl was arrested in São Paulo following an international manhunt. He was extradited to the Federal Republic of Germany, where he stood trial before a court in Seldorf. The trial began in the year 1969. During the proceedings, Stangl was found guilty of complicity in the murder of at least 900,000 people. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. In June of the year 1971, Franz Stangl died in prison. Another major defendant was Kurt Franz, the final commandant of Treblinka. After the war, he lived in hiding and was not arrested until the early 1960s. He was tried during the Treblinka trial held in Seldorf between the years 1964 and 1965. During the proceedings, testimony was heard from more than 100 witnesses, including former prisoners and former guards. The court established Franz's responsibility for camp operations and his involvement in crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, although his sentence was later reduced on medical grounds. Irmfried Eberl, the first commandant of Treblinka, was arrested in Berlin in the year 1948. However, he committed suicide prior to the commencement of legal proceedings and therefore never stood trial. In addition to camp commandants, other members of Treblinka personnel were prosecuted. More than 20 former SS staff members were brought before German courts. However, many auxiliary guards trained at Treblinka avoided prosecution due to difficulties in identification and the absence of surviving documentation. Polish and Israeli research institutions played a significant role in preserving evidence. Testimonies were systematically collected, cross-referenced, and published in academic studies. These efforts formed the foundation for historical understanding of Treblinka. By the end of the 20th century, Treblinka was formally recognized as one of the principal extermination camps of Nazi Germany. Its function and scale were confirmed by international historical commissions and scholarly consensus. Post-war investigations demonstrated that even in cases where perpetrators attempted to erase all traces of their crimes, systematic documentation and survivor testimony made historical reconstruction possible. Treblinka, too, was one of the most lethal extermination centers of the Second World War. Unlike camps that combined forced labor with mass killing, Treblinka was designed almost exclusively for immediate extermination. As a result, the overwhelming majority of deportees were killed shortly after arrival. Because no registration system existed, the exact number of victims cannot be determined with absolute precision. No lists of names were created, no prisoner numbers were assigned, and no official death records were maintained. Historical estimates are therefore based on railway transport data, demographic analysis, and survivor testimony. According to modern historical research, between 750,000 and 900,000 people were murdered at Treblinka. Most scholars agree that the most probable figure is approximately 850,000 victims. The vast majority of those killed were Jews from occupied Poland. The largest single group came from the Warsaw Ghetto. Between July and September of the year 1942, more than 250,000 Jews were deported from Warsaw to Treblinka, resulting in the near-total destruction of the city's Jewish population. In addition to Warsaw, deportation transports arrived from Białystok, Radom, Lublin, Stokowa, Kielce, Siedlce, Uk, Mała, Grodno, and dozens of smaller towns and villages. In many of these locations, entire Jewish communities that had existed for centuries were annihilated within a matter of weeks. Treblinka also received transports from outside Poland. Jews were deported to the camp from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, France, Greece, and the territory of present-day North Macedonia. These deportations are confirmed through German railway documentation and post-war judicial records. One of the most documented deportations occurred in August of the year 1942, when a transport composed largely of children from the Białystok ghetto arrived following the suppression of the ghetto uprising. Survivor accounts confirm the arrival of this transport and its destruction shortly thereafter. Among the victims of Treblinka were people from all social backgrounds. Those murdered included laborers, craftsmen, teachers, physicians, merchants, religious leaders, writers, musicians, and political activists. The extermination process made no distinction based on profession, education, age, or social standing. Several prominent figures of Polish Jewish society perished in Treblinka. Among them was Janusz Korczak, a physician, educator, and author who directed a Jewish orphanage in Warsaw. In August of the year 1942, Korczak was deported together with the children in his care and murdered in the camp. Also among the victims were members of Jewish councils, rabbis, cultural figures, and leaders of community organizations. Due to the absence of camp records, many names have been lost permanently, surviving only through family testimony or fragmentary documentation. In addition to Jewish victims, a smaller number of Roma and Sinti were also deported to Treblinka as part of Nazi racial policy. Although their numbers were significantly lower, their extermination is confirmed by multiple historical sources. The demographic consequences of Treblinka's operation were devastating. In large areas of central and eastern Poland, Jewish populations were almost completely eliminated. After the war, numerous towns and villages no longer contained Jewish residents, ending centuries of continuous communal life. The destruction extended beyond population loss. Cultural institutions, schools, synagogues, libraries, and social networks disappeared along with the people who sustained them. Entire family lineages were erased. Historians emphasize that Treblinka represents an extreme example of what has been described as instant extermination. In most cases, victims spent only hours inside the camp. Unlike in labor or concentration camps, there was virtually no period of imprisonment. As a result, the victims of Treblinka were denied not only survival, but also historical presence. Most left no written testimony, no personal records, and no known burial sites. Their deaths are reflected primarily through transport schedules and demographic absence. Despite these limitations, international efforts to identify victims continue. Research institutions in Poland, Israel, Germany, and the United States work to reconstruct names using census data, ghetto records, and family archives. Each recovered name contributes to restoring individual identity to victims who were deliberately reduced to anonymity. Treblinka remains one of the clearest examples of industrialized mass murder carried out within a short period of time under centralized state authority. After the end of the Second World War, the territory of the former Treblinka extermination camp remained almost completely destroyed. No functioning structures were left standing. The deliberate efforts of the SS to erase physical evidence of the camp had largely succeeded. In the immediate post-war years, the former campgrounds were used as agricultural land. Despite this, local residents repeatedly discovered fragments of human bones, ash, personal belongings, metal objects, and pieces of footwear emerging from the soil. These findings confirmed the information obtained through witness testimony regarding the scale of the crimes committed at the site. In the year 1947, Polish authorities officially recognized the Treblinka site as a place of mass extermination. Additional surveys were conducted, identifying the remains of foundations, burial areas, and traces of destroyed camp infrastructure. During the following years, discussions began concerning the creation of a permanent memorial. Due to post-war economic conditions and reconstruction priorities, implementation was delayed, but the territory itself was placed under state protection as a historical site. In the year 1950, the first commemorative plaque was installed at Treblinka. It marked the area as a place where hundreds of thousands of people had been murdered and represented the earliest formal act of remembrance. In the early 1960s, work began on the design of a comprehensive memorial complex. Architects and historians agreed that the site should not attempt to reconstruct camp buildings, as reconstruction risked misrepresenting historical reality. Instead, the goal was to create a symbolic space reflecting the magnitude of the loss. The Treblinka Memorial was officially unveiled in the year 1964. Its central monument is surrounded by thousands of stone markers. Each stone bears the name of a town, village, or community whose Jewish population was deported to the camp. These stones represent the geographic scope of the deportations and illustrate the destruction of entire communities across Poland and Europe. A designated section of the memorial marks the approximate location of the gas chambers and extermination zone. No structures were rebuilt. The area is identified solely through symbolic markers to preserve historical integrity. Treblinka became a site of official commemorations and international remembrance. State ceremonies, educational visits, scholarly research programs, and international delegations have taken place there regularly since the memorial's establishment. The historical significance of Treblinka has been formally recognized in academic literature, international documentation, and educational curricula. The camp is classified as one of the principal extermination centers of Nazi Germany. Historical research concerning Treblinka continues into the 21st century. Previously inaccessible archives have been opened, and archaeological studies have provided additional data. Scholars continue refining victim estimates and reconstructing deportation routes. Despite the absence of complete documentation, scholarly consensus confirms that Treblinka was among the most lethal extermination camps in history when measured by the number of victims and the brevity of its operation. Today, the Treblinka Memorial Site is protected by the Polish state as a national place of memory. All construction and commercial activity in the area are prohibited. The site functions solely as a place of remembrance and historical education. Although the physical camp no longer exists, its history is preserved through documentation, judicial records, survivor testimony, and academic research. These sources form the foundation of contemporary historical knowledge regarding Treblinka. A camp designed to eliminate people without leaving traces ultimately failed in its objective. While the victims were denied graves and names at the time of their deaths, their history has been documented and preserved. Treblinka remains a permanent record of state-organized mass murder and a central reference point in the historical study of the Holocaust.